Hello, BookTube, and I'm back with another video to talk about another book that I read in January. It was a reread for me. A reread of sorts. I'll explain that. And that was The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. And Alexandre Dumas was a French author. Everybody, as I'm sure everybody is aware, he lived from 1802 to 1870, and I guess his magnum opus is probably the Count of Monte Cristo, or possibly the Three Musketeers cycle. This was originally published serialized from 1844 to 1845, and this new translation has been done by Robin Buss, and this was done in 1996. And the video I'm going to talk about here, I'll go generally what the story is, because everybody, I think, is aware of the story. I won't go into any detail or any spoilers, other than talk about sort of its structure to a certain extent, and how to approach it possibly is one way to look at what I'm going to say here, because people do find it intimidating. It is a big book. It clocks in with notes, almost 1,300 pages. And yeah, it's like it was originally uh, translated to English in 1846, and that's well, I originally encountered this about 40 years ago. It's pretty well a good 40 years. But it was an abridged version, first of all. I didn't realize that until I was or if not finished, that I realized it was an abridged version. And I loved it, and I pestered the school librarian to get me an unabridged version. And she did a 2-volume version, or I think it was two. I'm pretty sure it was two little hardcovers. And I read that and thoroughly loved it, and I'd always loved it, but I'd never reread it again since then. And I will say that on this reread, with this new translation with a lot more added to it, it's definitely gone up there with 3 of my favorite novels of all time, all French. Les Miserables by Victor Hugo, and Gargantua and Pantagruel by Rabelais. And those two I've read repeatedly over the past 30, 40 years. But this is marvelous. It's basically, everybody knows the story. Edmond Dantes, a sailor. He's 19, very clever, very ambitious, in love with a young woman. Well, actually, she's quite young. She's like 15, I think, or 6. No, she's maybe 16 or 17. And they're planning on getting married, and he gets, because the captain of the ship that comes in, that he's on has died. He gets promoted to captain, but that creates jealousy. And this is basically, at the time of, just shortly after Waterloo, so 1815. So Napoleon's actually on Elba, and Edmond Dantes he doesn't, it's not falsely accused. It's always written down he's falsely. No, because he has a letter, but he naively has a letter that he's going to deliver that's basically from Napoleon, which is then considered, that could be considered an illegal act for him to do. But his punishment is severe, because the person who interviews him finds out that the letter was meant for his father, and explosions and then police. Interesting place I live in here. Anyhow, where was I? Yeah, so he gets thrown in prison, basically, at Chateau d'If, for life. Well, for in the dungeon, for life. And he eventually escapes after however many years, almost 20 years. It's like 16 or 17 or 18 years. He escapes, and he is sort of heir to a massive fortune on the Isle of Monte Cristo, a little rock, a pile of rocks, basically. But he spends that time, and it's basically a revenge story. So he spends a decade assembling people and everything for his revenge. And that's where the bulk of the story is him. Part of it is him, getting arrested, in prison, escaping, and then skips ahead 10 years, and then he's getting everything sorted and pulling in all the nets for his revenge. And that's what the story is. It's a revenge story, but it's much, much more than that. So I won't go into any more detail of the plot, because I think that's just what everybody knows. But as I say, there's 10 years that he spends assembling people and getting things together, and then he goes to Paris to prepare for the revenge that he's going to take out on these three people. Now, a lot of people find it, as I say, intimidating because of the size, and there are somewhat like Victor Hugo, but not as severe. There's digressions, because there are stories that you get the backstories of new characters that are introduced. But these are very, very important, because these tell you what Edmond Dantes has been doing during that 10 years through these stories and through these stories of these people. And you realize that these people are affected by everybody else. It's like taking a pebble and throwing it in, and this is a person throwing it into a pond. The ripples that go out, another pebble that goes in, the ripples interact. And it's these interactions that this story is about. And more pebbles are thrown in. And each person affects the other. And that's part of the story. And you really, really get a detailed sense of how these people interact. It is, yes, very complicated, the plot. The plot chugs along just perfectly, like clockwork, everything that's happened. Which you might say, well, that's not realistic. Well, it may not be. But it's as if Dumas knew this, and then he derails it slightly near the end, because it was too perfect. But it's about redemption as well. Redeeming himself and doing good things for people, helping people, and making sure that the ones, especially the ones that wronged him, are punished. But there's sometimes collateral damage to this kind of thing. So my advice for somebody who's reading this, and that's more, I guess, what this video is, it's sort of my thoughts on it, because I love it, and I'm definitely going to be rereading it again. But don't be intimidated by the size. The translation by Robin Buss is beautifully done in modern language. It's like contemporary language. It's as if people are talking together. It's not archaic English or clunky sort of translation to emulate the French or something like that, the French language. It is very clear, and that's what makes it very easy. It's a very easy read. And I've heard people say that it is very easy to read. But as I say, there are these sort of slight digressions, these extra stories. But go with the flow. You will you will understand, you will see the purpose of this as it goes on, because you get immersed in this. You're getting immersed into Edmond Dantes, his life and the life of other people, and how people do interact with each other and how they can affect each other. But with regard going back to the translation, there are always issues or possible issues with translating. Obviously, he's translated. Robin Buss is translated into a very simple English, modern, contemporary English. However, he uses sometimes euphemisms or sayings. It's very British, obviously. It's a very British, but there's Britishisms that don't quite work for me. And these are sort of little quibbles for me. It's like the one character says, "Oh, are you okay, love?" And it's been pointed out to me that chances are British people said that even then. Okay, yeah, that's fine. However, that is so British. That is a Britishism, and it's jarring to be reading a French person saying this. And I suppose if they're supposed to be saying something that's familiar and the equivalent of the language, but it's still, for me, it's still jarring. And there's a few little things like that. But otherwise, I had no problem. These are just small quibbles that are probably just personal to me. But yeah, it's just a wonderful story. It's people have said to me that they read it very quickly, and yeah, you do. Alexandre Dumas' stories chug along, and part of that is the action, but also the dialogue. There's lots of dialogue in especially Count of Monte Cristo. There's lots of dialogue, and that facilitates the reading and on, rather than long stretches of narrative where some books have, like I will be eventually talking about Les Miserables, where there's long stretches of narrative, and that's a different thing. You have to read it in a different way. But yeah, it's if anybody is wanting or thinking of reading Count of Monte Cristo, I urge them to, but I urge them to read the Robin Buss translation. And if you've never read classics before, it may be a bit it's a big chunk to chew into to begin with, and do it slowly. But don't get discouraged by where if you do get to a story section where they're talking about other characters or what they did, think of it, like, you realize that you as the reader know what's going on. The character who's telling the story doesn't know that these are things that were engineered by Edmond Dantes, and it throws more light onto the character of Edmond Dantes, as I said, and what he did during 10 years of his absence. So yeah, so I would suggest, like, to me, it is one of the greatest sort of adventure novels and revenge novels, obviously, that there ever has been done. There's been there's been films made from this TV series, all sorts, and there's been pastiches. Even Stephen Fry has written a modern version of the Count of Monte Cristo in a smaller thing, only about 400 pages, I think. But yeah, it's been used. The plot has been used. It's been very important in literature, English, and I'm sure in French literature as well. So yeah, if it is something that you've been putting aside and not wanting to read it because of its size, then I would say don't think of it that way. Read it slowly. Read it as it was done, serialized over a year or more. So do break it down. The one thing is, though, I would say is, if you're going to do that, do have a notebook with you and write down sort of characters and stuff, because there's a lot of characters in here, and some have their names changed, and it's sometimes they're hit at you rapid fire, so you do need to keep track of who these people are for it to all make sense. And sometimes having a little note to remind you is very helpful. Anyway, thank you, BookTube. Well, that's longer than I expected, 15 minutes. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope if you read Count of Monte Cristo that you enjoy it. Let me know in the comments. Take care.